Hey everyone out there, and welcome back to Nat Chat, where, as you may or may not know, we're currently exploring what to do as a college student or recent graduate who is dissatisfied with the existing system of grades, resumes, and one-size-fits-all careers, and who's looking to build a lifestyle that they're more excited about instead. In this episode, I'm joined by Shelcy Joseph. I found Shelcy through an article about her and her sister and how they've been building a lifestyle and fashion brand while living in New York City. Fashion does not seem like an easy thing to get into, despite being something that many people are interested in. So it was interesting to hear about how she got into it and how she's building up her brand and experience in that area. Shelcy is also an intense hustler. At one point, she was juggling 6 gigs at once in order to fund her pursuit of this work, and I think she's a perfect example of how you don't have to make the money right away. You can pick up side gigs and other work to make the finances work out until your own thing takes off, without having to give up the passion project just to get a paycheck. We talked about getting through those tough financial periods, learning the initial skills you need for freelancing and side gigs, getting into fashion and lifestyle brand work, and a lot more. So with that, please welcome Shelcy to the show. Shelcy, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Nat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to have you on for a couple of reasons. I found you first through the article that I sent you about making money through Instagram and growing some of your brand there. But then I read this other article that you wrote for The Muse that I wanted to ask you about. And I think this came out last November or so. And it was about managing 6 side gigs while looking for a dream job. And that, that's kind of like, it seems kind of crazy from the outside, right? But I was really curious, like, one, what were these 6 jobs you were doing? And, how did that all evolve and come to be?
So it does sound crazier than it actually was. I was working at Fresh& Co. doing social media management and also doing the same thing for the Boys Club of New York, which is an educational nonprofit. So these were the 2 main gigs that I had, which sort of split my weekday. So my 9 to 5 consisted of 2 jobs basically. And then off work, I was taking care of my YouTube channel and also my Instagram account. So growing my personal brand and filming videos, producing content. Every day, all the time is this kind of job where you never really take a break because everywhere can become content, especially as we're fashion and lifestyle. And the other job I was doing also, I was writing for different publications. So that's 4. Bear with me here, I swear. It will come together. I was also writing for different publications. So I wrote career articles, so the kind that you saw on Penny Hoarder. I had 2 to 3 companies that I was doing the kind of work for. And lastly, occasionally I was doing social media management for random clients, and I had consultations as well. So these were the main gigs that I had going on. So that was back then. I'm in a total different place now, but honestly, my schedule is always just as crazy though.
So it sounds like back then, the main things that you were doing for income to supplement the other projects was the social media management and the writing.
Yes.
Is that still true?
Yes, these are constants. I would say when people ask what I do, I can't ever really sum it up. I just always end up saying that I tell stories, but because the social media and the writing work really well together, and they're basically the 2 things that I always end up doing in different ways, either through freelancing, consultations, or main jobs at offices.
How did you get the first couple of gigs doing? We'll start with the social media management because that seems like an industry that, at least for the first couple of clients, it could be hard to get started in.
So I have to back up to 2015. I would say I graduated then. I went to Hunter College and I studied behavioral neuroscience. And I thought I wanted to go into research and get my PhD, start teaching, and have my own lab. So that was a dream until I actually had an internship in neuroscience, and I found that it wasn't exactly what I wanted in the sense that it was limited in social interactions and I wasn't being creative in the ways that I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to use different media. So make use of social media, make use of video, photography, just different visual medium. Use different types of visual medium to tell stories. And I wasn't really able to do that from working at the lab. And so I just slowly transitioned into marketing because I saw marketing was sort of like the umbrella term for all these things that have to do with writing, content marketing, with the ultimate goal of selling. And so I had a few internships at ARP where I did communications, for example. I also worked at College Fashionista where I did some writing and social media management. And slowly I started building my experience to then start pitching bigger companies to start hiring me to be in charge of their social media management. So that's how the main gigs in social media came about. And then the freelance came from me just growing my brand, posting on Twitter, being active on LinkedIn. And then that's how people start to get to know you, and then they pitch you and approach you about different services that they need that you can offer.
So you've been doing this since you graduated, basically?
Yes. A little before that. So let's say in 2014, but towards 2015, I was still studying neuroscience. But I think after closer to graduation is when I decided that I wanted to pursue social media full time. I was kind of still pressured to because my parents really loved the idea of me staying in neuroscience. So I couldn't just quit my major and go into marketing and writing and media. So I minored in writing, kept studying neuroscience, but seamlessly transitioned into marketing.
How did they feel about you not pursuing it past college?
Oh, I don't think they're still over it. Honestly, I don't even know if they quite understand what I do because sometimes I get to work from home and they imagine I'm just typing away at a computer and pretending to have a job. But since actually shown them results of things that I've done, I think it's starting to come together for them. But they're still thinking that maybe in the back of my mind or somewhere down the line, I'll go to grad school for neuroscience, which, I don't know. I don't think so, though.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a common issue I hear from parents understanding like tech jobs, especially ones where it's way more ephemeral, like the social media management, content marketing, even some of the design and some of the programming stuff. If it's not a work environment that you grew up in, it can be hard to like completely understand what's going on.
Right. And I should tell you too that here in the US, careers like this are options. And where I'm from, I'm originally from Haiti, where traditional careers are the only things that people know. You go to school to either become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And so my parents were extremely excited when I decided to go study neuroscience, but then to now find out that in this sort of in the moment kind of career trajectory, it makes them feel a little uncomfortable at times, but I think it's definitely the direction we're moving in, especially with the digital revolution.
What gave you that confidence? Because especially if you grew up in an environment, at least initially, where those kinds of jobs weren't really considered, if your parents never really would have thought of it, where do you think that came from?
I think it's just in my love of writing. I would say that writing has always been the constant in my life. Like no matter what I was doing, I always made sure to write. Whether it was poems, articles, or just journaling, writing was always sort of part of everything. So even when I was taking, say, molecular genetics, in my classes, I also had a creative writing class that I was taking just for fun, and I eventually minored in writing. So it was always to make sure that I would have writing back in my sort of in there somewhere. So I think the confidence came from my ability to articulate my thoughts and having people being able to relate to it. And so ultimately, I would say that's where social media sort of fell on my lap, where I saw I was able to write and also build a community from these stories that I was telling. And that's how slowly but surely the community built itself. And I think that's where the confidence came from. One, from being able to really say what I had to say and seeing that people were responding to it. And I said, okay, there must really be something that I can provide for people. And I just continued, and here we are now.
What was the first project that you did that kind of gave you that initial experience and confidence in relation to the writing and social media, like you were just discussing?
So what actually did it for me was a social media internship that I had at a neuroscience lab. So that was when the two worlds collided.
Oh, cool. That's a great combination.
Yes, totally. I worked at the University of Rockefeller doing social media management for them. So I was working at a lab translating the research in a language that people on Twitter would understand. So really just short, like bits of information that were written in non-scientific jargon. So I realized that there was a community of science enthusiasts online, and seeing that I was able to translate the research onto them. And I remember at the time, I think we were doing something on mice. I can't remember the exact details, but we were testing for schizophrenia. I don't quite remember, but it had to do with that. So, but I still felt really passionate about it. So I was able to write it and be able to translate it, and seeing that people were responding to it, I really started looking into the online world as a sort of creative outlet. And that was really the first thing that I did, which then propelled me towards this path.
Yeah, that's such interesting work too, because I'm sure you probably see this problem a lot where medical research and data gets very often misinterpreted by media, journalists, and most people who may be perfectly web savvy aren't savvy with reading original research or even knowing where to find it and how to interpret it. And so for you, that must have been really valuable having to exercise that mental muscle of reading and interpreting it and then trying to explain it in 140 characters in a clear way people would understand.
I absolutely loved it. Totally. And I think it's an industry where the medical space still needs to be disrupted with social media. I don't know of many accounts that are really adapting all the tools that are available to them to make it interesting to people, because they're still relying on traditional ways of marketing. So it was really fun for me. I felt like I was onto something there.
Is it something that you think you'd want to look into again in the future? Because what you're doing now seems very different from having the science bent to your work.
So I am still a huge neuroscience nerd, and I'm so proud of it. I don't think I'll necessarily be on the research team, but I won't lie to you. I still keep in touch with scientific studies that relate to it. I am so passionate about the brain, but it actually helped with my pitch that I had studied neuroscience, because I was able to explain why I am transitioning to marketing by saying that what I was really interested in is studying behavioral psychology as it applies to consumer marketing or making buying decisions. So it's still something that I find true today, because the more I tell stories that have the ultimate effect of making people buy into something, the more insights I gather from humans in general. And that's what I wanted ultimately, to be in a space where there were more interactions and I would be able to gather more information on a daily than sort of these long-term projects that you can do at a lab.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And you made a really good point there, too, about the value of some of this foundational underlying information, where it's nice to learn new, social media or whatever writing techniques by understanding some of the underlying psychology and neurophysiology below why a lot of this stuff works. That's almost even more valuable because that will carry over a lot more than these very niche little tactics.
Definitely.
Where do you go to stay up to date on this information? Do you have access to the journals that we wouldn't have access to, or is there public places you go to read it?
So there are public spaces, but I still have my alumni account at Hunter where I can check the resources that they have online and still keep in touch with anything that they're working on. There are also some professors, really few of them, maybe two or three, that I'm still in touch with and are in the same space. And every now and then we check in, we got coffee, and then I ask about what they're working on and do some more research on it if I find it's something that really interests me.
Yeah, I wish that there was a better repository or database for that for the public, because the most you get in a lot of cases is just an abstract, right? On PubMed or something. You can't read the whole thing. And then you either have to find some shady website where somebody scanned up the PDF or you just have to kind of give up and hope that like the abstract is enough and that their methods were solid.
Right.
But, what was it that kind of trained you to apply this to more, I guess you'd say, like lifestyle roles as opposed to being medical, because you had a lot of this ability to synthesize and convey information from working with the neurophysiology lab. And then how did that transition happen to bring it to more lifestyle type work?
So I really took time to understand whatever audience that I was working with wherever I was. So at AARP, we mostly serve the aging population, so anywhere 50 plus, right? So having that understanding kind of helped me to tailor my language accordingly. So I think the reason why it was sort of an easier transition for me was because I was able to synthesize information and make it concise from reading research papers. So then I was able to tweet out information in 140 characters. Like that was nothing to me, So I think I always took the time to know what audience I was working with. And from working with millennial audiences afterwards, so when I worked at College Fashionista, we mostly serve recent grads or people who are still in college. And then I went to study Fresh and Co, where we appeal mainly to fitness enthusiasts, lifestyle, food, healthy food writers, bloggers, anywhere in this line of work. So I think it was really easy for me because I am also a millennial, and to figure out exactly how we speak and being able to tap into that same sort of language and hobbies and really just kind of like infusing my personality as much into everything that I was putting out in terms of social content really helped in having someone relate to it, since I think some of the characteristics are the same for people in this generation. So that was particularly easy for me. So I really do enjoy writing in the millennial space because I think I'm sort of part of it, but also participating and also learning from other people. And it's a great experience.
Makes sense. It was a little bit easier and more relatable for you to talk about than abstract research.
Exactly. And I do think anyone who's able to do research will be a great fit in the online world because we have so much information available for us just a Google search away, that if someone can figure out how to, one, research that information, synthesize it without everyone having to do the work of obviously checking different websites, it's still a golden opportunity. It's still a skill that everyone would still hire for, I'm sure. So it's definitely a transferable skill that people can have from a scientific background.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's such a huge issue today with the amount of information that there is online and the amount of bad information that can make its way to the top of Google, too. Being good at researching and actually figuring out, okay, what's true here? What makes sense? What should I use as sources? What shouldn't I? Like, that's becoming more and more valuable every year as this infomania issue just kind of spirals out of control.
Definitely. And also add fact checking to it, then, it's the whole package, you're able to vet different types of information.
If all this fake news stuff keeps up, that skill may be quickly forgotten or quickly made useless.
I'm sure it's definitely on demand right now, though.
Yeah. When did NYCxClothes come into the picture? And is that how you refer to it? Is it New York City Buy Clothes?
So I call it NYCxClothes, but people say NYC Times Clothes, and that's fine too. So it started in 2014. I will tell you, Nat, that I was never the kind of child who only knew how to do one thing. I always had different hobbies, different passions, and it's something I always struggled with. Even in picking my major, to realize that I wanted to do neuroscience, I had to sacrifice so many other majors. I felt like, oh my God, I wish I could just major in everything, which I couldn't do. So early on, I was always sketching, and it was for fun. So I used to love observing the way people dress and try to guess their personality traits based on what they were wearing. So say someone was wearing ripped jeans jackets, I would say, oh, they're probably edgy, super, daring, willing to do everything. So it was a fun exercise for me to just look at someone and then try to guess what this outfit said about them. So I would sketch whatever outfit I really loved, like whatever stood out to me. And it was something that I went on to do until I moved here, where I realized that people were actually blogging. Like blogging then wasn't really such a big deal when I moved in 2010. So it's still not something that even came to mind. I didn't think fashion was something I could actually pursue. And so my sister, who at the time was not interested in fashion at all, or was not sketching or did nothing of the sort, she started getting into watching YouTubers, beauty gurus share their lives on social media. And she loved this sort of interactive way of talking about themselves, yet still making it relatable to people. So she suggested that we create a YouTube channel together. And that's when in 2014, we were like, okay, sure, let's just see how it is. And we'll say it's the story of two girls who just moved to New York and are finding themselves in a big city, but also documenting their adventures and personal style along the way. So that was for YouTube. We started doing it for fun, so posting at a very regular schedule, nothing consistent, because back then we were still having fun with it. And so around the same time, we created an Instagram account, and I can't even tell you how the Instagram took off way before the YouTube. Like our following grew quickly to the point where we're starting to feel like we were having an influence, however small scale it was. So we then slowly but surely became more consistent with it. It became a job of sorts, not quiet because it was something we really enjoyed doing. But we started being more consistent with our schedule. We started getting better camera equipment, really just trying to increase the quality. And so it grew now. And when people ask me what it is, it's a curation of online content and offline events that aims to empower people to reach their full potential and do it in style, of course. So that is how it came about. It was at first just a hobby, a way to have this sort of creative outlet to pursue the interests that we had in storytelling, fashion, and lifestyle. And then now it became its own sort of side hustle because we frequently work with brands, we find consultation, so many business opportunities come from it, and we could have never anticipated that outcome when we did it, when we started doing it back in 2014.
What kind of business partnership opportunities are you getting from it?
So the cool thing about it is that it spans the whole spectrum of like fashion and lifestyle. So you can work with local brands, for example, so boutiques people who are looking to have more exposure. So these business owners are happy to send you clothes, for example, to then take pictures with it and then tell a story around their brand. And our style, we really try to bring out what a brand has to offer, and not just by showing the outfit, but also telling the story of the owner, for example, highlighting their struggles, highlighting their challenges and things like that. Because we find that it's a little more interesting and people are more likely to buy into something that they can relate to. So, for example, we work with a lot of women, minority-owned businesses, and I think we do have 90% of our audience is female. And so these women can sort of just almost right away relate to the struggle of someone who is finding their way and carving their own path in a city like New York. So we work with businesses that are in the fashion space, but we also sometimes work with restaurants. Occasionally, coffee shops will reach out and say, hey, would you like to try our new matcha latte or something? And then it's the lifestyle part, because lifestyle basically can be summed up as everything else outside of the fashion. So where you travel, what you eat, what you choose to do on the weekend. So within that, there are so many businesses that we can work with. And one of the most exciting things is being able to meet people in real life. So that's when the event series came about. We recently started throwing events too, as a way to get bloggers to come together to network. But we provide really unconventional experiences. So, for example, the last event that we had was a painting class. And before that, we had 3 workout classes. And the next one is a dance class. So it's really just taking the stress out of networking by getting people into one place where they can get all sweaty and creative together. And it makes networking easier that way. So as it evolves, we're getting more ideas. But I think the purpose, the sort of underlying goal of what we do, of everything that we do, everything that we put out there, is the desire to inspire and empower.
How did the first of those brand deals come about? Because I feel like that's a dream for everyone who is starting to get into Instagram or other social media stuff, is to have companies contacting them. So how did that begin for you?
I was surprised. So the first brand collaboration came in 6 months after we launched our Instagram page. And by then, I think we had 1,050 followers, which we were just so surprised about because the company had about 20,000 followers. So we would have never dreamed to even pitch them. So it was a jewelry box company which offered a complimentary subscription for as long as we were posting the jewelry products. So we were featuring them on us or in flat lays and things like that. So we got so excited. And that's when we started thinking there was a business opportunity there, and really resolved to do it consistently so that we could attract other businesses. And through doing so, having them repost our images, more followers would come our way, and then more businesses would start paying attention to it. We were able to grow more quickly and just get to a point where we were starting to feel like we were having influence, and then be able to pitch other businesses. So I will say that half of it is reaching out, half of it is reaching out to brands if people want to secure collaborations. 25% of it is monitoring the Instagram community, so seeing what other bloggers are featuring and being able to see if there is any opportunity there. And also 25% of it is just word of mouth or people randomly finding you through hashtags or the Explore page on Instagram.
Very cool. So has that been the source of most of your growth, is doing these collaborations where you're promoting their product and then in turn they're promoting your photos of you using their product?
It has accounted for it. I would say not necessarily the main driver of traffic. I did integrate all of my social accounts to promote NYCxClothes. So I think at the beginning, to give us that traction, that's where most of it came from. And then slowly but surely, the use of hashtags, for example, the improvement in the quality of our photography, but also the copywriting, making it more engaging, encouraging people to leave comments. Which was definitely something that we figured out later in time. Wasn't something we were necessarily doing at the beginning, encouraging people to enter comments. So ending every caption with a question, for example, this was definitely be the type, and also definitely doing giveaways. So I think it's really a combination of things, but having worked with other brands is definitely a plus, because when you pitch other brands, they can then see the work that you've already done and then follow you. So reaching out to them via email, redirecting them back to your Instagram is also another way to reach out, because you think to yourself, if they say no, it's fine, but they'll have check out my profile maybe and even liked it or commented or even follow us, and maybe it won't work now, but we can always work later in time. There are some brands that things have worked that way. So it varies.
Oh, that's so fun though. And what do you think your goal is for it over the next year or two? What do you want to build it up to?
So with the event series, my goal was always to connect creatives in a way that didn't feel forced. So I was noticing that most of the events that I was going to, even as a blogger, to network with other bloggers, would be panels or happy hours for people who are not necessarily interested in drinking, or people who are too shy to even speak to panelists. I think it might be easier for them if they willingly choose to go to an event where there's centered around an activity that they enjoy doing anyway. So the painting class, I thought to myself, okay, any introverted person can do it if they're into painting, because if anything, they don't have to talk to anyone. They can just keep painting. So the goal with this is to continue growing the community and provide these experiences for the people around us, and really get people to network and making it as easy a process as possible. And for as long as Instagram is around, and we'll continue to be on, sort of keep our finger on the pulse of like what the next platform will be, because we won't just limit it to Instagram, for example, expand our audience beyond that. We will continue to provide storytelling and content marketing for brands that are interested in working with us. So in the next 2 years, it will probably scale more than it is now. It's definitely something that we're still working on, having scale, but I can see it continuing to build faster now that we already have a base. And I'm pretty excited. Honestly, I don't know. I have ideas. I've always been into, magazine writing. Maybe we can, launch something like that. Or maybe we can have it could become its own sort of digital media blog, or like who, what, where, for example. Or maybe it's just the opportunities, the possibilities are endless, but they're all, potential outcomes of the blog.
Do you think you'd ever start your own clothing line, fashion line?
Yes, that's the thing that I had in mind. You read my mind, actually. That would be one of because I used to sketch. I love doing that. I wasn't so much involved in sewing or the actual production of it, but I could design and do all these things. And that's definitely something that I want to do somewhere down the line, which will only be one of the products that would be offered.
Well, I mean, in some ways, this is a really smart way to build up to launching a new fashion line if you don't have a lot of startup capital, right? Because you build up that audience and you have a lot of people who really enjoy a certain style of products, and they're following for the lifestyle and using other people's products to kind of convey that image. And then you can almost work in piece by piece, right? New things that you launch. It's a really cool model for building something like that I think a lot of people interested in fashion and other, design related areas might not think of.
Definitely. And I think having this space allows me to experiment with what people are interested in. And sometimes you receive feedback from your community members, and it gives you an idea for something else. Like the event didn't come to me until someone said, "Oh, you go to a lot of events. I wonder if you could tell me what's going on in this," or people asking to meet up for coffee. And I say, "Oh my God, I'd love to meet everyone, but I probably won't get to. So what if I just bring everyone in one place?" So a lot of times people give you suggestions and you sort of just run with it. So I think it's a great way. And another step towards possibly launching my line would be, for example, to try selling. So there are apps like Poshmark or eBay even where people can post their closet sales. What I do personally, I give my clothes away to Goodwill and Buffalo Exchange or anything like that. But if I had time, I would actually set up a line where maybe I would just like sell my own clothes. And from there, you would see if people would actually be interested in buying if it was originally made. We've had people actually ask if we make the clothes that we wear. And while I wish that was the case, that might actually become a reality soon enough one day. So I'm pretty excited about that.
The photography on your account is really good. Are you doing that, or do you hire a photographer, or?
We hire photographers for the most part. So you'll find, and these are for all the pictures that involve us in them. The lifestyle we do ourselves. So we have our own, since we started doing YouTube, we had our own camera where we invested in a Canon EOS T5, and that's just been the magical camera. And we, changed the lens and things like that as we're starting to get more sophisticated with the photography. So at the beginning, you might not know exactly how you want a picture to turn out, but as you grow, you'll see, oh, I want the lens to be able to blur out the background. And so you buy a lens that does that. So we take all the pictures that don't necessarily have us in them, but there are also the occasional iPhone pictures that Chris and I take when we're in the moment. That's just always going to happen. But for the most part, we work with photographers, especially for branded content.
How did you get good at photography? Was it something you'd always done, or have you learned it more recently?
I don't think I'm that great at it. Honestly, I think there is room for growth. I will tell you that what I think I'm good at is sort of visual, like sort of creative direction. So if I go to a restaurant and I love the interior design, I'm able to compose a shot in a way that will look aesthetically pleasing. So I think that's what I'm really good at. So a lot of times I think it's not even so much about the quality of the photography itself because I don't use I don't use Lightroom or Photoshop to edit my images. There are apps that I slowly sometimes dabble in that I'm still learning. And my sister is honestly the one who's the eye of NYCxClothes and I'm the mouth. We always joke that I tell the stories and she sort of comes up with the visuals. And I think she influenced me a lot in the ways that I see things. So when I see an opportunity, so have you ever heard people say, oh, that's definitely a photo op, or, oh my God, it's so Instagrammable? They usually refer to things that once put together or natural settings that are instant visual eye candies of sorts, So I think that's really what I'm good at.
So yeah, I think that's just one of the things that I'm personally interested in too. I've been trying to get more into it. So I like asking people what they've done to develop some of that skill because I think some people have a bit more of a natural eye for it and I don't. So,
and I think it's something you can, always, it comes with time, it's not necessarily, I think some people are gifted in photography, but I think it's a skill that can be learned, definitely. And video editing, which is what I'm better at, is also helping with the photography because it makes the apps less intimidating. So if I tell myself, oh, I know how to use Final Cut Pro, then Photoshop won't necessarily be as scary, but it is scary to me.
Yeah. So as you're building up this community and this personal brand, and then you've got some of these other more like writing social media gigs to help support it, how do you find that balance between the stuff that you're doing to keep food on the table and the more almost pure passion projects where you're growing this brand?
So I am still trying to find it, but I am very to-do list driven. So when I work with specific clients, I will set some time in the day to work as I would in a 9 to 5, in a structured 9 to 5, especially when I work from home, it can be really, really hard to focus. So I try to maintain a list of things to do that I will not and the day will not end for me until I do it. So I think I'm really good at sort of organizing myself in a way that makes sure I get what I need to get done. And this isn't to say that I don't procrastinate. I do. but I really try to structure my schedule around the priorities. So the things that I do to put food on the table are the priorities only because it is just the nature of living in New York City, for example. So it's really great. But I do have to say one thing that's definitely helped was managing, for example, one of the clients that I have right now is state agency, and he helped people find apartments in New York City. This couldn't have been a better fit for me since I am naturally always exploring New York City and sharing whatever discovery that I make in a day. So that is also the kind of content that I post on their social media platforms. So building more of a narrative around the neighborhoods, around the people who live in it and things like that. So that, for example, was really great because it easily fit into my schedule since I naturally just go out and about. I capture images for my blog and I also capture images for the people that I work with. So it's so great that things kind of blend together in that sense. It makes it easier sometimes, which you can also say makes it confusing to know when it's work time and when, it's just you time. But I don't think that necessarily needs to be such a strict distinction, especially if at the end of the day, you're still checking off that part in your to-do list. And I think also doing it with two people. So having my sister kind of fill in some things when I can't do it because I have big deadlines, it definitely helps. Like this morning, for example, she was working on promoting our next event while I was like batch scheduling content for all the people that I was working with. So not having to worry about that. So then when she will actually go on and about her own work, then I can kind of come in. And so we try to split the work and always at the end of the day come out with something. I try to make everyone happy. It's the balance that I'm trying to find. But at the end of the day, I know what the priorities are, and my work in that sense comes second. But there are times when the lines are blurred, and I just try to be still professional about it.
Have there been any moments where it felt really tight financially and you've been worried about being able to keep doing this?
And I say so's.
Yeah.
So with the freelance world, things just always change. So there's no stability, especially when you're doing it at the beginning. And as I said, I officially started freelancing in January. So it's still new to me and it kind of just fell on my lap from having NYCxClothes and seeing people and having people be interested in, teaching them how to, create content for the Instagram, how to go about creating content. So there was a time when my biggest client just kind of dropped out on me because she unexpectedly lost her job. And that was in April. And that was hard. And I think at that time, what I did was basically just like a lot of Craigslist gigs, like seriously, just like going on there, finding all these writing gigs, finding occasional event or bartending gigs. I'm a scrappy creative person. I will always try to think of like the next way to supplement the income. So I think having that sort of like attitude of perseverance has definitely helped in getting right back up when something like that happens. And I think the more you get used to getting up and springing back as quickly as possible, the faster. I don't know if you like sort of believe in like these like spiritual things, but I do think sometimes the universe does reward the hard work that you put out. And so after a while of like doing all these gigs, you end up finding something consistent. So that's always just been my story.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's just a numbers thing, right? The first 1, 2, 3 of those gigs isn't going to go anywhere. But if you kind of quit there, then you'll never land on the one that does go somewhere. And pretty much all of those seemingly overnight success stories or whatever, people are ignoring the long history of like trying things that didn't end up working out and everything before that, which is like just as integral part as the one piece that did end up working out.
Exactly. So it's always just a matter of, and this is when, for example, being someone of many hobbies and interests can help because you do end up developing a variety of talents, which helps in always having something going on or some way to make money. I call it being resourceful, while my parents just call it being crazy, but it has worked out for me so far. So,
well, I feel like, I mean, for you, it's a good combination where some of this interest in the fashion and lifestyle stuff might be harder to do freelance off the bat just because it's not as easy to sell on your own. But then having this marketing skill set that augments it is something that, one, helps with building your own brand through this project, but then is also something that you can go sell on your own if you need to, do more or less of that to make ends meet. It's a good way to fill in the space in the meantime.
And there are times when no matter what you did or how many people you pitch or how many things you apply to, you just don't hear back from people. It's complete radio silence. So at that time, I think it's important to focus on learning because you will then have the competitive edge that you need to make yourself more marketable. So I've had weeks where I wasn't necessarily doing any freelance work. And so during that time, I was still working on my own side hustle, so on creating content for NYCxClothes and finding new brands to collaborate with, but also learning, for example, how to, do Facebook advertising, for example, how to better sort of hone that skill because it's really, really important right now. And so I think there are other ways to spend the time. It doesn't always have to just be about money, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. It's like sometimes you have to choose between something where you'll learn a ton, but make less money, and then something where you might make a lot of money, but you'll just be punching holes in papers, right? And it can definitely be attractive to take the higher income job, but it's almost a bad bet since in the short term, you might be better off, but in the long term, since you're not learning as much, you're actually worse off than if you had taken the lower income, higher learning opportunity job off the bat.
And it creates a sort of dependency with the job that you currently have, where it's like you're praying not to get fired because then you wonder who will hire you if you don't work on continually learning and innovating your skill set. So I think regardless of how busy someone can be, it would really pay off to always make time for learning.
Yeah. Well, and the high income can be a trap in itself too, where you don't want to take more high learning opportunities because you're afraid of not having that big paycheck anymore.
Exactly. And I am such a fan of just investing in education. I read business books sometimes. Gary Vaynerchuk is one of my favorite moguls that I follow. And I've always had some great takeaways from any content that he puts out there that I consume, whether it be books, conferences, just anything, YouTube videos, articles, and he's everywhere. So I think I have never really been shy to put money out for things that I know I'll get immediate actionable strategies from.
Yeah. Who else like Gary do you follow to stay up on all of this, and who's had the most impact on your thinking and learning?
So yes, Gary Vaynerchuk has had the most impact on my marketing career because he taught me how to tell stories. So he sort of broadened my thinking when it came to content production. So not making it so much about the sales, but really providing value out of it. He has a series of articles and YouTube videos where he goes into details about how to produce great quality content in a way that will build a community. So it's not just about generating sales, but having your page be a sort of guide to your audience where people can always go to it to get information, be inspired, be entertained, and all of that. So that has definitely helped in generating engagement with all the accounts that I've managed, all the places where I've worked. So Gary Vaynerchuk is one of them, and I would say Tim Ferriss is another person who has helped me figure out the entrepreneurship world in general. And if nothing else, one thing that he has taught me that will continue to follow me everywhere is just how to better manage my time. So I don't know if you've read The 4-Hour Workweek.
Yep.
So it's, oh my God, what did you think of it?
Oh, I mean, that was one of the books that got me into the space back in the beginning. So, which I think is pretty common for a lot of people who get into it. That book has had a huge impact on the community.
See, I'm really not surprised because it had the same effect on me. And I would say I read it at a really good point in my life where I was sort of struggling with how to spend my time. And because I was freelancing, sometimes I had too much time on my hand that I wasn't always sure how to spend in an effective way. So Tim Ferriss is another person who has had a major impact on how I spend my time. I like the 80-20 principle of spending 20, I think, on what produces 80% of it and then eliminate whatever is too time consuming, delegating. So he's taught me a lot about entrepreneurship in general. So I definitely And I still like listen to his podcast and all of that. So Gary Vaynerchuk, Tim Ferriss, James Altucher. I love his unconventional way. He's just like anti-college. He doesn't think it's necessary. And while I'm not, and I can't be because I have Haitian parents, for example, I really do agree with his unconventional way of thinking about careers in general, where he's a fan of encouraging creativity and kind of creatively carving your own path rather than following traditional careers. So I tend to align with people who think that way because they do give me a lot of ideas and they always teach me how to be resourceful. Because with them, it's like with James Altucher specifically, he's aware that you need to pay your bills and put food on the table at the end of the day, but he tells you exactly how you can do that without necessarily falling for the bigger sort of discourse around work and life.
No, I think they're all like pretty big, well-loved names in the space. Is there anything outside of the business sphere that's had like a big impact to you, whether that's like reading or even like documentaries or anything like that?
Yes, I love, for example, Abstract on Netflix. It is a documentary series that highlights profiles different artists. And what I love about it is one, the variety of, so the diversity and the people that they bring. So we have graphic designers, stage designers, chefs. And so just seeing their creative process really helps me make better sense of my own creative process. So I'm able to articulate that too. So I'm always amazed with just how they figure out how to like explain something that is so abstract, which is why it's called abstract, I guess. But so that's one documentary that I really love. A book that has a great impact in like my career specifically has been The Defining Decade by Meg Jay, where she talks about just how your 20s, like contrary to what they might have taught you, it's not a time to just waste mindlessly. It's a time to invest and build so that you can sit back and reap the benefits later. So that's how it had a huge impact in my life. But no, I don't just read nonfiction. I don't just consume nonfiction content. I do love. So I do this thing where I read like literary books that I like from like old classics. So
Yeah, of course.
the most recent one that I finished was Nabokov, Lolita from Vladimir Nabokov. And what I do love about these fiction stories is just like they have timeless truths in them. And it's just, they're such great like psychological cases that there's always something to learn about humanity, even if this book has been written a while ago. So one of my other favorite authors is Fyodor Dostoyevsky, the guy who wrote Crime and Punishment. I read this book too for fun, and that was after college. And so you'll find me reading these books if I'm not reading something Gary Vaynerchuk wrote, only because it's fun. I enjoy poetry too. So I think reading has been a big part of my journey and building my confidence too.
Yeah, well, it's such a good point about the stories having all of these lessons interwoven in them and giving you these examples that are a lot of the times more informative than the nonfiction, psych books, business books. I saw a really good tweet about this yesterday. It was like nobody reads their child a 10 bulleted list before bed about being a good person, right? There's bedtime stories and stuff because like that's what we remember and that's what we go back to. And it just, and I feel like it sticks in your mind a lot better, whereas it's easy to churn through BuzzFeed or Business Insider articles and never really take much away from them.
I totally agree. And I think they both, have a purpose. But with nonfiction, what I find is that I go to nonfiction when I need to address something immediately. So I need to figure out how to better market my brand or do that. So it has a practical value to it. Whereas with fiction, for example, the application is more subtle. It's not ephemeral at all. So it follows you every day. It's a long lasting sort of effect. And it transports me, most importantly. So I enjoy these books because they tell stories that have the same sort of universal lessons. And I think we just experience these same things, but the contexts are more modern. I don't think there's really a difference in that sense. I think whatever is wrong with the world now was always wrong with the world before, and people still wrote about that. And today we're just getting more sophisticated with it. That's all.
I think there's a lot of value to be had in reading books as old as whatever the problem is you're facing, right? So a book on social media marketing, you're probably going to want one that's written in the last 3 or 4 years. But a book on being happy, you can go back 2,000 years and you're going to find some of the best stuff that's ever been written on it.
I agree. And there's a reason they're also called old classics, They just never go away.
They survived the test of time. They're the ones that have lasted.
Definitely. I am a huge philosophical nerd, so we can like go on about these things forever.
Do you read like philosophy as well, or mostly via fiction?
No, I read philosophy too. So I won't necessarily read the story of Plato from beginning to end, but I'll know sort of like his whole viewpoint and kind of what his beliefs were. And I love contrasting that with other authors that I read about. So yeah, I won't necessarily remember dates and things like that because I don't think they're relevant, but more sort of like content of what their work was. So I'll read about the philosophy around morality and things like that. So just things that allow me to sort of broaden my mind more. And there's still themes that are relevant to my life today. So these are the sort of things that I'll read about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's similar to what you were saying about the value of fiction, where it's not about solving a specific problem. It's about improving the hardware under the individual skills, right? Just kind of building your mind. I find that, like really good literature, philosophy is really effective for that.
And I think fiction is great at creating a setting that ultimately communicates a truth that we can all relate to. So it's not so much about the fictional element, but more so the takeaway from it.
And the people and where we see ourselves, being reflected in them, everything. Do you have any last thoughts or pieces of advice or things that you wish you had known when you were kind of getting started in using these gigs and side projects to allow you to pursue and work on going after this art and job that you really love?
Yes. I wish that someone had told me earlier that it was okay to just reach out to people and ask them out for coffee, for example. It's something that I just always felt intimidated by, and I always thought I would be mostly just annoying people because of their busy schedule. But to find that there's a whole world of people out there willing to give back, be mentors, and train, it was just like a game changer for me. So I wish someone had told me that earlier, that you can just reach out to someone who has a position that you're looking for at a specific company and then just say, hey, can we go out for coffee? I can meet you at your office. Just like making it as easy for them as possible to just say yes and just going after it. That's one. And then the second thing to kind of like along the same lines, I wish someone would tell me that it was okay to just ask for things. So not necessarily just ask people for opportunities, but for example, pitching brands, so like if the opportunity doesn't come to you, you can go to it and ask for it. So if one day I say, hey, Chris, I feel like we can definitely work with more brands as the fall season is approaching and we're not necessarily getting any collaboration requests from brands, then we can just do the work of researching certain brands that align with our aesthetic and then we go to them and find it. So I wish like more people knew that it's okay to do it. There's nothing shameful about it. And you've probably heard that before. The worst thing that can happen is someone saying no, because once they say no, you can then move on to the other person and to the other person, whoever will end up ultimately telling you yes. So these were the two things.
Even a 1 or 2% success ratio is good.
Exactly. And usually the success that comes from one thing sets the tone for everything else that happens, so it's not about the numbers necessarily, but really just the value that comes from each thing.
Well, I think that's a really good reminder for anyone listening. It's come up a number of times with other people who we've had on, who it's just very consistent thing that everyone says has helped them is just not being afraid to reach out, engage with people, ask for help, be willing to have somebody say no, and then just ask the next person. Like it seems to be a huge force multiplier for a lot of people who are out doing what they want now.
Definitely. And I think we tend to put so many limitations on ourselves because of numbers. For example, we'll say, oh, I don't have 10,000 followers on Instagram, so I can never work with this brand because they won't even look at my profile. It's not necessarily true. It's a matter of knowing your story, being able to articulate it clearly, but also making sure to highlight what value you can bring to the table for the brand that you're pitching. Because essentially that's what will get them sold on what you're saying. So I think it's a matter of just being bold in that sense. And there's this saying that I tell myself all the time, and it goes, maybe can I anyway? And I know it's horrible because you think to yourself, okay, I will always keep pushing beyond no's. So sometimes if someone will say, so there's a crazy thing. So there's a TED talk that I really love, and it was a guy who said, the title is something like what I learned from 100 days of rejection. So he set a challenge for himself where every day he would go to people and ask anything, but putting himself in situations where he thought he would get a no. And he did 90% of the time. So things like going to McDonald's and asking for a refill and said no. Going to Chipotle and asking for a second burrito bowl for like a discounted price if he takes out the rice, for example. So just like sort of these crazy demands. But the point of it is that he trained himself to ask for things. And at times he'd be surprised to see that people were willing to help him. So he'd go to the street and say, hey, do you have $10? And we're like, yeah, sure, here. So, whoa, okay. So it's just this whole, that was his lucky day because people don't just randomly hand out money if you are not a homeless person or anything like that. So I think the whole point of it is that sometimes the first answer you get is not the definitive answer. So just maybe you can anyway, So it has guided me, making me a little more fearless.
No, I love that. Maybe I can anyway. Is that it?
Yes, maybe can I anyway. And I think it's taken from an Indian saying. I don't know, but someone told me that after their trip to India, she learned that from one of the sort of a Buddhist philosopher. And so I think that's where the origin comes from.
I love it. I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on too. So, Shelcy, this was a lot of fun. Where online should people go to find more about you and your work? NYCxClothes, obviously. What else?
Okay, so on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube, it's NYCxClothes. People can find it on there. And any profile will always link them to my email, which is nycxclothes@gmail.com. And that's for NYCxClothes related businesses. But I have my own personal profiles. It's Shelcy Joseph everywhere. Whether you're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you'll always be able to find me there.
Great. Well, we'll be sure to link to all of that. And maybe we'll run into each other at a coffee shop or something sometime. It's a small city.
I really enjoyed this too, Nat. So definitely feel free to reach out if I can answer any questions for the audience or for you or anything. I'm here. All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nateliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.